Even before launch, I had my worries about one particular feature of the Xbox Series X, its built-in video capture. See, we knew that they were using AMD's architecture for CPU and GPU, and any streamer who's tried to use AMD's video encoders has rapidly discovered they're a bit crap for that job, even on their newest 6000 series cards, whose RDNA 2 architecture lives inside both next-gen consoles from Xbox and PlayStation. These cards and this architecture has proven to be very powerful choices for running games, but AMD are still far from the top of the game when it comes to the onboard video encoders. 7 years ago, I made a video about the then brand new and freshly launched Xbox One's ability to record gameplay clips with a feature they called Game DVR. I compared it to externally recording the exact same gameplay on a dedicated external HDMI capture device. And long story short, the built-in recording was garbage and ruined the quality, ruined the detail, ruined the smoothness of gameplay clips, making the feature all but useless. And indeed, I never used it again for the entire life of my Xbox One, or indeed later, my Xbox One X. The Xbox Series X retains this ability though, with a few updates, not least of which is a dedicated button for the feature right on the controller, making actually using the feature way more convenient. And of course, the ability to record in resolutions up to 4K and 60 frames per second, which is a huge leap up from the restrictions on the old consoles. But is it any good? Is it even worth using? And beyond sharing little slices of gameplay moments on social media, can a cash-strapped aspirational content creator use it instead of buying a fancy new 4K capture card? Hello again, I am Blunty, and today I'll be answering those questions for you. So I'd appreciate a thank you in the form of a YouTube algorithm appeasing thumbs button hit, comment, maybe a sub, maybe a bell. So let's run over the basics quickly first. The Series X can record video in 720p, 1080p, and 4K. You can choose to record on demand, manually starting a recording for something you're about to do that you want to capture. Obviously, this is the most useful and practical option for the context we're using today. Or, and this is the default setting, a record what happened function, which keeps a rolling recording of your gameplay in the background at all times. It then saves the most recent little chunk to a file when you hit the capture button. Good for capturing some amazing thing, some weird glitch or awesome win or whatever, so you can then share it on social media. But the catch is, with either option, you'll have a hard time limit. For 720p, it'll be up to the last 3 minutes. At 1080p, it drops to 1 minute, and at 4K, it's just 30 seconds. Clearly not very useful for content creators. However, if you hook up an external drive to the USB ports, your manual recordings now have a limit of a full hour per file. The only catch is, when you're saving to an external drive, the Xbox will no longer be able to edit them, trim them, or even share them from any of its inbuilt tools or services, not even Xbox's own cloud stuff. The benefit is, your files are now on a drive you can immediately disconnect from the Xbox, plug right into your PC or Mac, and you can use the recordings directly and immediately in a video editor of your choice. No fiddling, no conversions, no middle steps, just nice, tidy, standard video files. Now then, it's convenient, it's easy, and it's fast, but is it actually worth using? I put it up against my own personal workhorse capture card, the Avermedia GC573, aka the Live Gamer 4K. It has been for years now an absolutely robust and rock-solid capture card for me. So, you're seeing 720p now captured internally. For this setting, the Xbox generates a H.264 encoded file at 59.94 FPS. If you're not a video editing nerd, just pretend I just said 60 FPS. It's fine, trust me. Audio is stereo at 48K sample rate, and the whole thing is churning on a variable bitrate of between 500 and 600 kilobits per second, which is fine for 720 60 FPS-ish. I'm not actually going to bother with an internal versus external capture comparison with this one, as frankly, if what you're looking to do is create content, you'd be a complete twat to start at 720p. No content creator would bother with this, unless it was, like super short crap for nano attention span sites like FlickTok or Snapshit or whatever the hell people who can't focus on anything for more than 12 seconds at a time are using these days, that content is garbage. It's made to be disposable, forgettable garbage, and compressed to garbage by the site, so who the hell cares what the actual image quality looks like anyway? Forget it. 1080p and 4K are far more useful for real content made with at least some care, effort, creative intent, and pride, basically. So we'll focus there. At 1080, you'll get H.264 again, 59.94 FPS again, stereo 48K again, and variable bitrate of between 10,000 and 16,000 kilobits per second. Quite a bit lower than I would recommend for ensuring a nice clean recording at 1080p 60. About half of what I'd recommend starting at, actually, and less than a third of what I actually use myself. So, as you may have spotted already, the lower than ideal bitrate from the Xbox has done what you'd expect it to do to a video file. Smush a whole bunch of previously crispy detail down to a blurry sludge of indistinct smudgery. Now, to be fair, this feature was not designed to replace a capture card for content creators. Of course it wasn't. It's not even its default setting to do this. And to be fair, using a comparatively low bitrate was a very deliberate choice on Xbox's behalf, not made out of ignorance or carelessness or stupidity, but to budget system memory and drive space. Video files are very thirsty sods. This is their good enough for most people who will just be sharing their stuff on Twitter or whatever setting. So it's not like I don't understand why they did this. I'm only trying to show what exactly the compromise is for this, especially for those hoping to use it as at least a stopgap measure until they can get a proper capture card or upgrade their existing one to 4K or whatever. But I will say this, even though the onboard recording is clearly inferior, it really is just that good enough stage to be useful. It can work if it's all you've got, especially when you consider very few people watch things like YouTube videos of video games at full screen on their PCs or laptops, and a huge and ever-growing number of viewers watch on mobile devices, whose small screens already hide some of the visual crimes of badly encoded video. Which brings us to 4K. Personally, even though I very often only publish in 1080p unless I have a very specific need for 4K, largely because some of the stuff we just talked about, I do like to start with the highest quality video possible. Gives me more possibilities, more flexibility, and even when you're just working in a 1080p timeline, 4K lets you do some editing tricks like lossless crops, digital pans and such. So, at 4K recording, the Xbox switches up the encoding to HEVC, otherwise known as H.265, the same high-efficiency video codec, which is what HEVC stands for, by the way, that Apple switched to a few years back when they started doing 4K on their iPhone cameras. It's a bit more demanding to work with in an editor, processor power-wise, so if you edit on a laptop that isn't exactly state-of-the-art or top-of-the-line, you may find yourself struggling a bit with this. But it does save a ton of drive space compared to getting the equivalent quality from H.264. Again, we're at 59.94 FPS, and again, stereo 48K sample rates. And the encoding is again variable data rate, around an average of 25,000 kilobits per second. Once more, that's half of the rate I'd personally recommend starting at, and 1/4 of what I actually use on my capture cards. But then again, my capture software is set to encode with the less efficient H.264 because, as I said, it makes files much easier to work with in an editor without having to convert them to proxies. But the Xbox Series X's internal 4K recordings compared to how I actually record 4K for my own content, well, in fact, it's pretty decent. It's not hard to spot the slight loss of detail if you go looking for it, and when you're watching at a native resolution and on a desktop monitor sized to 4K and at full screen. It's especially noticeable if you look at the UI and lettering and such, places of crispy lines and high contrast. But in general, the gameplay, the models, the environment, the movement, and action all look damn close enough, especially after a final compression and export, and especially whatever YouTube does to it. It is close enough that I'd be happy enough to use it where I'm lacking access to my still superior and more finely tunable capture card solutions. So, my final recommendation to those of you who want to make use of this feature for more than just Twitter posts about your royal chicken crown victory or amazing kill streaks is go for it, actually. Totally serviceable. Stay in 4K if you can for the extra detail and more efficient encoding, even if you're just planning to upload at 1080p. And of course, make sure you're using an external disk for that hour-long recording crap instead of being capped at 30 seconds. I've linked to the one I'm using down below. I recently reviewed it, and it's a rock-solid bit of kit. Super small, super light, super reliable. But all that said and done, It's still not a replacement for a capture card if you're going to get serious about production. It's not only visually and technically better to use an external capture card like the one I'm using, it's a faster workflow, a much faster workflow. And you have way more control over resolution, way more control over frame rate, way more control over bitrate, and way more control over file formats, and it makes your editing life easier. So yeah, again, not a universal replacement, but certainly good enough if you're stuck in a spot where you don't have another option. Thanks for watching. Hope very much this has been useful to you. Thank you as always to the patrons scrolling up above there. Your support is tremendous. I thank you very much for it. To the rest of you, thank you for your support if you've done any supportive stuff like thumbs and comments and subscribes and stuff. If you haven't done any of that, well, I hope you found the video useful anyway, even if you don't show any kind of support at all like a selfish little bastard. Thanks for watching. I am Blunty, and we'll catch you next time.